The crisis begins. The ship trembled like a wounded beast, shaking under the weight of chaos. Lights flashed red across the wide metal walls. Warning alarms screamed in every corner, and frightened voices filled the air. The alien vessel was under crisis, though no one could explain how it started, only that danger was everywhere. In the center of a long hall, a small alien girl stood frozen, her thin hands pressed against her ears, her eyes wide with fear. She was no ordinary child. Though nobody dared to speak her name aloud, she carried blood that was royal, blood that could change the destiny of her people. But in that moment she was not a princess, not the daughter of a queen. She was only a child trembling in a storm of confusion. The soldiers around her shouted orders, trying to push back the threat outside. But none of their commands could silence the girl's cries. Her sobs rose higher than the alarms, louder than the voices, sharper than the clash of metal. She could not breathe, she could not move. Her small world had collapsed into fear. The crew looked at each other helplessly. They had been trained for battles, for weapons, for war, but not for this. How could warriors calm a child when their hands only knew how to fight? No one dared touch her, not because she was untouchable, but because they were afraid of failing her. Afraid of failing the queen. In that moment of despair, a new sound entered the hall, quiet footsteps. Slow and steady, a human man stepped through the smoke, his figure simple, his face calm, his clothes not marked with medals or rank. He was an outsider, one who did not belong to the mighty alien empire. Yet there he stood, walking closer when others kept away. The soldiers turned, frowning at him, ready to order him back. But something in his steady eyes stopped them. He was not afraid, or maybe he was, but his fear did not control him. He moved like someone who had faced storms before and learned not to run. The little girl's sobs grew louder as the human approached, her small body shaking as if the sound itself was breaking her. The man paused for a moment, his eyes softening. And then he did something strange, something that made no sense in a hall filled with alarms and soldiers. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic wand, thin and ordinary, something that looked almost laughable in such a dark moment. The aliens blinked, confused, some even whispering in disbelief. Was this human mad, bringing toys in a time of crisis? But the man lifted the wand slowly, dipped it into a tiny bottle of liquid, and raised it to his lips. He blew gently and a bubble floated out. Shining under the red flashing lights, one bubble became two. Two became many, drifting softly through the smoky air. They shimmered in rainbow colors, fragile and light, floating like pieces of peace in a world breaking apart. The girl's cries slowed, her wide eyes blinking at the strange shapes moving before her. Her hands dropped from her ears, her breathing unsteady but quieter now. The bubbles danced near her, and for the first time since the alarms began, she forgot her fear. If only for a moment. The hall grew silent, the soldiers staring at the scene as if they had stepped into another world. None of them had expected this. None of them had believed something so small, so meaningless could matter, but it did. It mattered more than any command they had shouted, more than any weapon they had carried. The human smiled faintly. Not with pride, not with arrogance, but with simple kindness. He knelt down, blowing another stream of bubbles toward the child. Her tears stopped falling, replaced by a faint smile, fragile but real. For a moment, the crisis outside did not exist. There was only the girl, the bubbles, and the man who refused to let fear win. What no one in the hall knew was that they were being watched. High above, hidden in the shadows, a figure stood silently, her eyes glowing with authority and power. The alien queen, mother of the child, had seen everything. She did not speak, not yet. But her heart stirred in ways even she could not understand. In the midst of chaos, one human had chosen kindness instead of strength, and that choice was about to change everything. The frightened child, the little girl, stood frozen in the middle of the great alien hall, her small body trembling like a leaf in a storm. Her eyes were wide, still wet from tears, her chest rising and falling as if she could not find enough air to breathe. The sound of alarms echoed all around. Red lights flashed again and again, but for her, the loudest noise was her own pounding heart. She looked at the human kneeling before her, confused, uncertain, almost afraid of this strange figure who made bubbles float in the air. The soldiers and officers around them remained silent, their sharp eyes locked on the child, waiting for her to break again. They were ready to protect her body if harm came, but none of them knew how to protect her heart, her fear, her fragile spirit. The child's small fingers reached out toward a bubble drifting close. It popped softly against her fingertip, vanishing into nothing. Her lips trembled, caught between another sob and a tiny smile. The world was collapsing around her, but here, in this small space, something gentle pushed the fear back. The human did not speak. Not yet. He only blew another stream of bubbles, letting them float and swirl through the smoky light. His eyes stayed soft and steady, as if telling her, "You are safe. You are not alone." It was not in his words, but in the quiet patience of his act. The girl's breathing slowed, though her body still shook. She had never seen something so fragile, so harmless, being treated with such care on her world. Strength was measured by blades and commands, by voices that shouted louder than storms. But here was a creature from another world, choosing not to shout, not to command, but to create. The soldiers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. This was not what they were trained for. They could not understand how simple soap and air could calm what their armor and weapons could not. One whispered, "What is he doing?" But no answer came. The girl's eyes began to follow the bubbles with focus. Each one floated gently, carrying her fear away in tiny bursts of rainbow light. She reached again, catching another one, this time smiling faintly when it popped. Her tears slowed, her sobs faded, her spirit leaned toward the quiet magic of the human's kindness. The human finally spoke, his voice low and calm. "You see? They cannot hurt you," he said softly. "They float, they shine, and then they disappear." The girl blinked at him, still unsure, but the gentleness in his tone pulled her closer. It was not just the bubbles, it was his calm, his choice to meet her fear with peace. One soldier stepped forward, ready to pull the child away, but the girl's small hand lifted, stopping him. She wanted to stay. Her gaze stayed locked on the human, on the simple wand in his hand, on the bubbles that seemed to carry a piece of safety within them. She lowered her hands from her face completely. Standing straighter, her chest still rose too quickly, but now her breaths were less broken, less painful. The fear was still inside her, but it no longer ruled her. The child of a queen had found comfort not in power, but in play. From above, the hidden figure watched silently, her heart torn between pride and shock. The alien queen saw her daughter calm under the care of a foreigner. She had prepared for warriors to guard her child, for servants to obey, for weapons to stand ready. She had never prepared for bubbles, never believed such a fragile act could hold such power. The hall seemed different now, quieter, though the alarms had not stopped. The human and the child existed in their own circle of calm, a fragile bubble of peace within the storm. Every soldier's eyes were drawn to it, some with disbelief, some with awe, some with fear of what this meant. The girl whispered softly, her first clear words since the crisis began. "More," she said, her small voice breaking the silence of the hall. The human nodded, smiling gently, and raised the wand again. A fresh stream of bubbles floated into the air, glowing like stars in the red light. And for the first time since the danger began, the little girl laughed. It was not loud, it was not long, but it was real. Her laugh echoed softly, a sound brighter than the alarms, and the queen, watching from the shadows, felt something shift deep within her heart. The soldiers did not move, afraid to break the spell. The officers did not speak, uncertain what this act meant for the future. But the human continued, simple, patient, calm, for he knew the truth. Sometimes the smallest act could hold the greatest strength. The frightened child was no longer only afraid. She was beginning to believe, and that belief would soon change everything. Bubbles of peace. The bubbles floated like tiny stars across the hall, round, weightless, glowing faintly as the red warning light struck their surfaces. Each one shimmered in colors that shifted and danced. Blue, green, gold, violet, like rainbows trapped in fragile glass. The little alien girl's eyes widened, her tears drying upon her cheeks. Her trembling slowed, replaced by wonder. She lifted her hand again, chasing one bubble, but it popped gently against her skin, leaving her fingers wet with nothing more than a drop of water. The human smiled softly, not rushing, not forcing. He simply raised the wand again and blew another line of bubbles, letting them drift across the smoky air. Each bubble rose higher, moving between the beams of light, spinning slowly before disappearing. They were so fragile, yet in their fragility there was something powerful, something even the alien soldiers could not explain. The girl took a small step forward, her tiny feet scraping the cold metal floor. She reached again, catching two bubbles this time, giggling as they popped one after the other. Her fear, which had been heavy like a mountain on her chest, began to lift, not completely, not yet, but enough that her breath no longer hurt. The soldiers exchanged glances, their eyes full of disbelief. They had seen weapons destroy ships. They had seen battles crush armies. But they had never seen soap and air silence fear. It was absurd, it was impossible, and yet it was happening right before their eyes. The human spoke at last, his voice low and steady. "See? They shine, they float, and then they vanish," he said gently. "But while they are here, they are beautiful." The girl tilted her head, listening, her eyes locked on his. Her lips trembled again, but this time not with a sob, with the beginning of a smile. A soldier shifted uneasily, his armor clinking as he whispered to another, "What is this human doing? Is this some kind of trick?" But his companion only shook his head slowly, unable to look away from the fragile scene. It was no trick, no weapon. It was something deeper, something they had never been trained to understand. The girl laughed again, louder this time, the sound soft but clear. The hall itself seemed to pause, as if even the alarms lowered their voices to let her laugh be heard. The human blew another stream of bubbles, this time letting them rise higher. Swirling like tiny orbs of light above her head, she spun around, chasing them, her laughter carrying through the smoky hall. For the first time, the crew saw not the fear of a child, not the weakness of a frightened heir. They saw joy, simple and pure, born from something no one had expected. The human had given her not power, not safety through strength, but peace. The queen, still hidden in the shadows above, watched with sharp, calculating eyes. Her daughter's fear had broken like glass, and now it was being replaced with something else. The queen felt her chest tighten as she whispered to herself, "Peace through play? From a human?" She had seen countless warriors kneel before her, countless enemies fall. She had seen battles rage, treaties signed, promises broken, but she had never seen her daughter laugh like this, not in the middle of a crisis, not in the shadow of fear, and she wondered, could such small acts hold power greater than swords and armies? The human lowered the wand, his eyes still calm. He did not smile widely or boast. He only nodded as if satisfied with the small change he had created. To him it was enough, the child's smile, the quiet peace in her heart. That was worth more than victory. The girl, however, was not ready to let the bubbles end. She tugged gently at his sleeve, her voice small but clear. "More, please," she said, her tone no longer breaking with fear. Her words carried across the hall, shocking every soldier who heard them. The man nodded again, dipping the wand back into the bottle. With a soft breath, he filled the air once more. This time the bubbles came in clusters, dozens floating together. Drifting like a school of fish through water, the girl clapped her hands, chasing them with laughter that spread warmth through the cold hall. For a moment the crisis felt distant. The alarm still screamed, the ship still trembled, danger still pressed at the doors, but here, in this circle of peace, there was no fear, no panic, only light and laughter. The soldiers lowered their weapons slowly. The officers exchanged quiet looks, their minds unsettled. They did not understand this power, but they could not deny it. It had silenced fear when nothing else had. And above them, the queen's eyes narrowed, her thoughts sharp and conflicted. This human had dared to comfort her daughter with something so simple, so fragile, yet he had succeeded where all her warriors had failed. Her heart warred with her pride, unsure if this was weakness or a strength she had never known. The girl leaned closer to the human, whispering softly, "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling but no longer with fear. The man only smiled faintly, lifting the wand again, and with another breath, another world of bubbles filled the air. Peace had entered the hall, not through victory, not through orders, but through kindness, and though fragile, like the bubbles themselves, it was real, and everyone in that hall, child, soldier, and queen, would never forget it. The hidden observer, from the shadows above the great hall, unseen by her soldiers, the alien queen watched. Her tall figure was hidden behind the great pillars of black stone, her robe flowing like liquid night around her. Her eyes glowed with quiet fire as she looked down at the scene unfolding below. Her daughter, the precious heir to her empire, had been trembling only moments before. Her sobs had torn through the ship like knives. Her fear had shamed the queen, for no child of hers should show weakness, and yet, here was the child, laughing, smiling, chasing fragile bubbles that shimmered like stars. The queen's hands clenched at her sides, long nails pressing into her palms. She had seen humans before. They were a young race, reckless, weak compared to the might of her people. They were clever, yes, but fragile, always relying on tricks and tools instead of true strength. In her eyes, they were nothing more than children of the stars, untested and small, and yet, this one, the simple man, was not fighting. He carried no weapon, no shield, no command. He carried only a tiny bottle and a plastic wand, things that should mean nothing. But somehow he had done what none of her trained warriors, none of her honored servants, none of her loyal guards could do. He had silenced her daughter's fear, not with power, but with kindness. The queen's heart stirred with something she could not name. Was it anger? That her own people had failed where a stranger succeeded? Was it shame that her daughter had found comfort in the arms of an outsider? Or was it something far more dangerous? Respect. Her eyes narrowed as she studied him closely. He did not stand tall like a conqueror, nor did he kneel like a servant. He simply existed in calm silence, blowing his bubbles. Every breath he gave brought peace, every bubble carried light, and each laugh from her daughter felt like a blow to the queen's pride. The soldiers below did not dare speak. They shifted uneasily, their hands gripping their weapons, their eyes flicking nervously toward the child and the man. Some looked afraid, not of the human, but of what the queen might say if she revealed herself. Others seemed almost enchanted, unwilling to look away from the fragile scene. It was as though time itself had slowed, all drawn into this strange circle of peace. The queen tilted her head, her sharp crown glinting faintly in the flashing lights. She thought of her empire, of the long years she had ruled with iron and fire. Her people respected strength. They bowed to power. But this fragile act of comfort was neither strength nor power. And yet it worked. It worked in ways her own teachings never had. Her gaze dropped to her daughter again. The child was no longer trembling, no longer sobbing. She was laughing, chasing bubbles with the innocence of youth. Her small hands stretched toward the air, her voice rising with joy. It was a sound the queen had almost forgotten, a sound she feared she might never hear again. The queen felt her chest tighten. She had prepared her daughter for war, for the burden of a crown. She had never prepared her to smile in the face of fear. And now it was not her training, not her rules, not her empire that had saved the child's heart. It was a human. The queen's mind raced. What did this mean? Was it a threat? Proof that humans could sway hearts with weakness? Or was it a gift? Proof that even weakness held its own kind of strength. Her thoughts twisted like a storm. She remembered the endless councils where her generals spoke of humans as pests. She remembered the battles where humans were dismissed as foolish and fragile. But now, looking at her daughter's smile, she wondered if fragility itself was a kind of power. The queen took a step forward, her shadow stretching across the upper balcony. No one below saw her, not yet, but she felt the weight of her decision pressing upon her shoulders. Should she reveal herself now, break the fragile peace, and remind everyone of her authority? Or should she wait, watching this human longer, seeing what more he could do? Her pride demanded she step forward, claim control, but her heart, though she hated to admit it, whispered for patience. Something rare was happening here, something that might change not only her daughter, but her people, her empire, perhaps even the galaxy. The queen's eyes softened for a moment, though her face remained stern. She remembered her own childhood long ago, before the crown weighed heavy upon her head. She remembered a moment when she too had been afraid, but no one had blown bubbles for her. No one had given her peace. Only orders, only demands, only lessons in power. Her daughter now had something she never did, and the realization cut her like a blade. She turned her gaze back to the human. His face was calm, almost ordinary, but his actions were not ordinary at all. Every movement spoke of patience, every breath carried intent. It was as if he understood that kindness could reach where commands could not, and the queen could not deny what her eyes told her. Below, the girl tugged at the man's sleeve again, asking for more bubbles, and he gave them without hesitation. Without complaint, the queen's jaw tightened. This was not the way of her people, but maybe, just maybe, it should be. Her soldiers waited, her people fought outside. Her empire trembled in crisis, and yet here in this hall, she had found something greater than strategy, something she could not measure with power or fear. She had found humanity. The queen stayed in the shadows a moment longer, her decision building inside her like the gathering of a storm. Soon she would reveal herself. Soon she would step down from the darkness and speak. And when she did, the fate of both her daughter and the human would be forever changed. The queen steps forward. The hall had grown strangely quiet. The alarm still pulsed, the red light still flashed. But they seemed distant now, almost like echoes. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on the small circle of peace where the human blew bubbles, and the little alien girl laughed. The soldiers stood frozen, their weapons lowered but their minds still on edge. They could not explain what they were seeing. They had prepared for battle, they had expected orders, but none of them had prepared for this, and none of them dared move, because they all felt the weight of someone else watching. From the shadows above, the queen's footsteps finally stirred, slow, heavy, deliberate, each one echoing through the chamber like the beat of a drum. Her tall figure stepped into the light, the flowing robes of her station trailing across the polished metal. The crown upon her head caught the red glare of the alarms, throwing shards of light across the floor. Gasps rippled through the soldiers. They dropped to their knees as one, their voices rising in shaky unison. "All hail the queen," they said, their voices trembling. Their fear was not of battle, not of danger, but of her, their ruler, their living law. The girl froze mid-laugh, her small body stiffening as she turned. Her wide eyes blinked up at the towering figure of her mother. For a heartbeat, fear tried to return. But then her eyes slid back to the human kneeling beside her, still calm, still steady. And her heart did not break again. The human lifted his eyes slowly. He did not kneel, he did not bow. He simply met the queen's gaze with quiet calm. It was not arrogance, it was honesty. He was not her soldier, not her servant, and he did not pretend to be. The queen's voice filled the hall, sharp and cold as steel. "Human," she said, her tone carrying both power and judgment. "What are you doing with my daughter?" Her words struck like lightning, and the soldiers flinched as though they had been whipped. No one spoke, no one breathed. The silence was a blade drawn across the room. The human held her gaze, then slowly lifted the wand. Without a word, he dipped it once more into the little bottle and blew. A bubble floated toward the queen herself, drifting slowly until it hovered near her crown. It popped gently, leaving only silence behind. The queen's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening. She could have seen it as mockery, could have called it insolence, but instead, she felt something stir deep within her chest, something she had not felt in many years. Curiosity. Her daughter tugged gently at the human's sleeve. Whispering softly, "More, please," she said, though her voice was quieter now, as if she feared her mother's judgment. The queen turned sharply toward her child. She had expected to see trembling, shame, weakness, but instead she saw hope shining in her daughter's eyes, a fragile spark that had not been there before. The queen's chest tightened. Her daughter had smiled because of this human. Her daughter had laughed because of him. And though the queen's pride burned, she could not deny what she saw. She stepped forward slowly, each movement filled with the weight of her authority. The soldiers bowed lower, some pressing their foreheads against the ground. The air itself seemed to grow heavier as her presence filled the hall. The human did not move, he only watched her approach, his calm face lit faintly by the glow of the bubbles drifting through the air. When she finally stopped before him, towering above both him and her child, the silence deepened. The queen's eyes burned into his, searching for weakness, for deceit, for arrogance, but she found none. Only calm patience and quiet kindness. At last she spoke again, her voice softer but no less sharp. "Why bubbles?" she asked, her words carrying the weight of command. "You face a child in fear and crisis, and you choose not to hold her, not to guard her, not to fight for her, you choose. Bubbles." Her question hung in the air like a blade. The soldiers dared not lift their heads, the child dared not breathe too loudly. Every living soul in the hall waited for the human's answer. The man lowered the wand slowly, letting the last bubble vanish in the air. Then he spoke, his voice low but steady, his words simple but heavy with meaning. "Because she did not need power," he said. "She needed peace." The queen's eyes flickered, though her face remained stern. His words echoed through the chamber, simple words, but they struck deeper than the longest speech. They carried no fear, no pride, only truth. He looked at the child again, then back at the queen. In moments of fear, commands only add to the storm, he continued, but sometimes the smallest thing can remind us to breathe, to see beauty, to feel safe. He lifted the wand again, holding it gently between his fingers. Even bubbles. The Queen's soldiers shifted uneasily, unsure if they had just heard wisdom or madness. The officers at the edges of the hall whispered nervously, but the Queen herself stayed silent, her thoughts storming behind her eyes. Her daughter smiled softly, pressing herself against the human's side as if to prove his words true. The Queen's heart clenched again. This was her child, her heir, the future of her empire, and yet in this moment, the child had chosen to trust the human over her own guards, her own people, even over her mother's presence. The silence grew heavier, stretching longer. The Queen could shatter it with a single word. She could order his death. She could strip him from her daughter's side. She could prove that no one, not even kindness, could stand against her rule. But something inside her whispered differently. Something told her that to strike him down would be to strike down the very thing that had saved her daughter's spirit. Something told her that this moment mattered more than pride, more than tradition, more than power. The Queen's lips parted, her voice low and deliberate. "You are either the greatest fool I have ever seen," she said slowly, "or the wisest." The human only bowed his head slightly, not in submission, but in respect. "I am only human," he said, "and sometimes being human means choosing peace when others cannot." The Queen stared at him, the storm in her eyes raging silently. Then she turned her gaze down to her daughter, whose smile was small but steady, and in that fragile smile, the Queen saw something she had long forgotten. She saw hope. The human's answer, the Queen stood in silence, her towering presence filling the hall like a storm waiting to break. Her soldiers still knelt, their faces pressed to the floor, afraid to even look up. The child leaned against the human's side, small hands gripping his sleeve, her eyes wide but calm now. The human himself remained still, unbowed, the simple wand resting between his fingers. The Queen's voice broke the silence at last, cold and sharp. "You claim my daughter needed peace, not power," she said, her words echoing through the chamber. "Tell me then, human, what is peace to you?" Her question struck the hall like thunder. The soldiers shifted uneasily. Waiting for his words, the child held her breath, as if the wrong answer would shatter the fragile bubble of calm around her. The human looked up at the Queen, his face calm, his voice steady. "Peace," he said slowly, "is not the absence of danger. It is the presence of hope." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "Hope," she repeated, her tone thick with disbelief. "Hope will not stop a blade." "Hope will not shield a world. Hope will not win a war." The man shook his head, his gaze unflinching. "No," he said, "hope alone will not stop war, but without it there is nothing worth protecting." The Queen's jaw tightened, but she did not speak. The soldiers dared to raise their heads slightly, their eyes flicking between their ruler and the human who spoke so boldly. His voice was not loud, yet every word carried like the strike of a hammer. He gestured softly toward the child beside him, her face bright with wonder. "Your daughter was drowning in fear," he said gently. "She did not need another command. She did not need the weight of your crown or the sharpness of your sword. She needed to remember that the world is not only fear, that even in the midst of crisis there can still be light." The Queen's eyes flickered, her heart stirring though she kept her face cold. The human raised the wand again, blew softly, and another bubble drifted into the air. It rose slowly, fragile and beautiful, before bursting in silence. "Look at it," the man said. "It lives for only a moment, yet in that moment it shines with all the colors of the stars. It does not fight. It does not conquer. It simply exists, and in that it brings joy." The child clapped her hands softly, laughing again as more bubbles floated past her face. The sound echoed through the hall like music, pure and untamed. The Queen's chest tightened at the sound. It was a laugh she had not heard in years, not since her daughter was younger. Before the weight of her bloodline began to crush her spirit, the human's voice grew softer, yet more powerful. "Your empire is built on strength, on fear, on the weight of power," he said. "But power cannot chase away every shadow. Sometimes only kindness can do that. Sometimes the smallest act can remind us why we fight at all." The Queen's hands curled into fists, her pride screaming at her to silence him. But another voice whispered in her mind, "Listen." The Queen's hands curled into fists, her pride screaming at her to silence him. But another voice whispered in her mind, "Listen." She remembered her own childhood, when she had been trained to fight, to command, to rule. She had never been soothed. never been comforted, never been allowed to simply be a child. Her daughter now had something she never did, and it came from a human she had dismissed as weak. The soldiers whispered quietly among themselves. Some sneered, unable to accept that such fragile things could matter, but others looked at the girl's smile and wondered if the human spoke a truth too deep to deny. The queen finally spoke again, her voice low, heavy with challenge. "And what happens, human, when kindness fails?" she asked. "What happens when the enemy does not laugh, when they do not smile, when they strike with blades and fire?" The man looked at her, his eyes unshaken. "Then we fight," he said simply. "We fight because we must, but even then we do not forget why. Not for conquest, not for crowns, but for the moments like this." He glanced at the child again, who giggled as a bubble landed softly on her nose. "For the smiles we protect. For the peace we wish to see again when the battle ends. Without that, even victory is hollow." The queen's breath caught in her throat. Though her face remained stern, his words clawed at her pride, yet they rang with a truth she could not deny. She thought of her victories, of the countless battles she had won. But what had they given her? An empire of silence, a daughter who feared shadows, a throne that weighed heavier with every passing year. The human's voice dropped lower, almost like a whisper, yet it filled every corner of the hall. "You asked why bubbles," he said. "Because they remind us that beauty can exist even in the midst of fear. Because they remind us that not all things fragile are weak, and because sometimes all a child needs is to remember that the world still holds wonder." The hall fell silent. The soldiers dared not move. The child leaned against him again, smiling softly, her fear gone. And the queen felt her heart tremble in a way it had not in decades. For the first time, she did not know whether to feel anger or gratitude. Her pride screamed that this human was a fool, but her heart whispered that perhaps he was something else, something more. Her daughter looked up at her with bright eyes and spoke. "Mother," she said softly, "he made the fear go away." The queen's throat tightened, her sharp gaze flicking between her daughter's smile and the calm, unshaken human she had ruled for years with power, with control, with fear. But in this single moment, with a single act, this man had shown her another way. The queen's voice, when it came, was low and uncertain. "You speak of peace as though it were stronger than war," she said. "Stronger than crowns, stronger than blood. Do you truly believe this, human?" The man bowed his head slightly. "Yes," he said without hesitation, "because war can end a life, but peace can save one." The queen's decision, the hall was silent. The alarm still echoed in the background. Red lights still flickered across the walls, but none of it seemed real anymore. Every soldier, every officer, every servant held their breath, waiting. The queen stood tall in the center of the chamber, her crown casting shadows across her sharp face, her long robe whispering against the cold floor. Her daughter stood at the human's side, her small hand clutching his sleeve, her eyes bright with hope. The queen's heart warred inside her chest. For years she had ruled with strength, with command, with the unshakable belief that only power could hold an empire together. Fear had been her shield, authority her weapon, and yet, here before her, everything she believed was being shaken by something as fragile as soap and air. Her eyes fell upon her daughter, no longer trembling, no longer sobbing. The girl was laughing again, chasing bubbles as they drifted upward like stars escaping into the night. And for the queen, that laugh cut deeper than any blade, because it reminded her of something she had lost long ago. Her own childhood, when laughter was stolen from her too soon, replaced with lessons of war and duty. The queen clenched her fists, her long nails digging into her palms. Pride screamed inside her, "Do not yield. Show strength. Crush this foolish human who dares to speak of peace in your hall." But another voice whispered softly, quietly, dangerously inside her heart. "Look at her smile. Look at your daughter's eyes. Is this not what true strength looks like?" She stepped closer, her shadow falling across the human and the child. The soldiers pressed their foreheads lower against the floor. Fearing her next command, the officers braced for judgment, ready for the sharp blade of her words. The queen's voice finally broke the silence. "Low and heavy, human," she said, her tone unreadable. "You speak of peace as though it were stronger than my crown. Stronger than fear, stronger than war." Her eyes narrowed, glowing with fire. "Do you think your fragile kindness can rule an empire? The human looked up at her, calm as ever. He shook his head gently. No, he said, his voice steady. I do not think kindness can rule an empire, but I think it can save one. The queen's breath caught, though she did not show it. The words pierced her armor, slipping past her pride, striking deep into the place where a mother's love still lived. Her soldiers shifted uneasily, some scoffing under their breath, others staring at the man as though he had spoken forbidden truth. The queen's daughter turned toward her, eyes shining with innocence. Mother, she said softly. He made the fear go away. Her voice was small, but it carried through the chamber like a song. The queen's lips parted, but no words came. Her child had spoken truth she could not deny. The queen's pride raged like a storm, but her heart ached. She saw herself in her daughter, saw the fear that had once lived inside her own young soul, the fear that had been silenced not by comfort, but by discipline. She had been made strong, yes, but at the cost of joy. Was that the destiny she wanted for her child? Was that the destiny she wanted for her empire? The queen stepped even closer, her towering figure now only a breath away from the human. Her soldiers trembled, certain she would strike, but instead, she lowered herself slowly, her knees bending, her robe flowing around her like waves of shadow. Gasps filled the hall, soldiers daring to lift their heads. The queen of an empire was kneeling. She looked into her daughter's eyes, not as a ruler, but as a mother. Her voice softened, almost breaking. You are not afraid anymore, she whispered. The child shook her head, smiling as another bubble drifted past. No, mother, I am happy. The queen closed her eyes, her chest tightening. Happy. A word so simple, yet so rare within her halls. Her hand rose, trembling faintly, and she touched her daughter's cheek. For a moment, the weight of her crown, her empire, her pride, all of it felt smaller than this one fragile truth. The queen turned her gaze to the human again. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady. You have done what none of my soldiers could do, what none of my power could achieve, she said. You silenced her fear. You gave her peace. You gave her joy. The human bowed his head slightly, his face calm. I gave her only what every child deserves, he replied. Kindness, the queen's throat tightened, her pride fighting desperately against the truth before her, but she could not deny it. Not when her daughter's smile still shone, not when the laughter still echoed in the hall. At last she spoke, her words carrying the weight of decision. You have shown me that humanity is not weakness, she said slowly, but a strength my people have forgotten. The hall erupted in gasps, soldiers staring in disbelief. The queen rose again, her tall figure regal and commanding once more, but her eyes had changed, softer now, wiser, touched by something she had long buried. She turned to her soldiers, her voice sharp with authority. Remember this day, she commanded. Remember that strength is not only in blades and commands. Sometimes it is in the smallest acts. Sometimes it is in the fragile things that survive storms. The soldiers bowed deeply, their voices trembling as they answered, Yes, my queen. The queen looked once more at her daughter, who was still laughing as the bubbles drifted upward. And for the first time in years, the queen herself felt the corner of her lips curve. Just slightly into a smile, the human lowered the wand at last, the bottle nearly empty. He rose slowly, his calm gaze meeting the queen's one final time. Their eyes locked, two rulers of different worlds, bound by a fragile truth, and the queen gave a single nod. Small but powerful. You have my respect. Human, she said, and perhaps my trust. The hall exhaled as one, the tension breaking like glass. The child clapped her hands, laughing again as the last bubble floated upward and vanished. The queen looked up at it, her heart heavy yet lighter than before, and she whispered softly, almost to herself, in the midst of crisis. Bubbles became stronger than any weapon.